So what we're going to do now is take a little bit of time to put the three pieces we've talked about together, the backwards mapping, the learning goals, and the GRR stuff into lesson planning. And you have a link for this. We do have a new teacher Google website. If you go to your Google Sites when you're signed into your Google account, district Google account, and search for new teacher, you will get it. It's also at the end, the web address is at the end of every email you get from me, which I know many of you got lots of emails from me, so you can find it there. And also, there's a copy in your binder of the Salinas Union High School District Basic Lesson Planning Template. You guys are a beta group on this, so congratulations. Our district really didn't have a simple, straightforward lesson planning template in the past, and we saw that as a need, so together with taking the very extended lesson study template that the instructional coaches use, which is, I don't know, 4 or 5 pages long or something like that, probably what you guys, some of you did in your teacher prep programs, it sounds like, where you're analyzing every last little instructional choice that you're making. We scaled back from that and came up with something that incorporates the essentials of GRR and some other things that are really good for you to have in mind when you're planning your lessons. So we will be talking about it. So as I said, it's simplified from the district's fuller template used for the instructional coaching cycles. So the instructional coaches throughout the year at your sites will be working with individual PLCs on lesson planning. For you guys, for the most part, this may mean participating in learning walks where you're going to observe other teachers doing specific things. Maybe they'll go do a learning walk on learning goals and you just go see everybody's learning goal. Maybe it'll be on checking for understanding strategies. And then you'll probably be asked to participate in several of those. Hopefully not this year, but in future years, then you will be pulled into more deeper lesson studies with your colleagues where you all prepare a lesson together deeply and then teach it and observe each other as you teach it. And then the good thing about that is you can see what doesn't work for everybody else's and fix it before you do. It's yours. So, but it's a great way to share information and practices with your colleagues. So, but this is a simpler plan that's based on GRR principles, and that we're asking that all beginning teachers and use it. So, and that even experienced teachers could find this as a helpful tool for guiding their individual lessons. It can be filled out quickly, and you can even use something like this as notes for students who are absent, perhaps, which makes it even more flexible and useful to you. And you can customize this. This is a Google Doc. You can download it, save it as your own doc, make any changes to it that you want that work for you. So, and it can be found in the binder. Also in the resources page, excuse me, of the All Things New Teacher website, and the address for the website is on the slide here, which you have in your handouts. I know they're kind of small in the handouts. Also, as I said, if you go to Google Sites and search on the district Google Sites, you'll find it. Once you get to that website, you'll see a page on the left. One of the menu items says resources, and toward the bottom of the resources page is a link to this. Now, one thing you won't see in the slides today, but hopefully you will see in the part that you download or the document that you see online, is there are instructions. I used the comments section of the Google Doc to put instructions on the role of each of the parts of the lesson plan. The very top, okay, you got your name, your date, your lesson plan, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go through that. You figure that one out. But let's look at the topic or content standards and the purpose or learning goal. Students will be able to statement. So just a reminder that research does show that when students understand the learning goal, more learning occurs. So another reason to do it. And the bottom line that we've talked about before is that you post it and have one every day. Sometimes you might have a learning goal that covers a couple of days. That's fine. If there's a difference between the 2 days, you might want to indicate that, but sometimes a lesson takes more than 1 day. And again, the idea of having students interact with that goal is very important. Have them write it down, do choral reading, popcorn reading, random call, a couple of people, paraphrasing it to a partner, whatever it is. Find some way that's not going to bog down your whole instructional period, because we don't want to spend 35 minutes talking about the learning goal, but at least just find some way for your students to interact with it. Okay, so materials and agenda. So again, what do you need for you and for your students in order to make this lesson happen? And again, this serves as a really good cheat sheet, especially if you do them ahead of time, a couple weeks in advance, and you check it every day, the night before, whatever, to see, oh yeah, that's right, I needed to go run off these copies, or I needed to gather extra sets of whatever for the lab. That way you've got everything right there in the same place, easy to find what you need. And the agenda. Michael and I were having this discussion about the importance of an agenda, really, to drive your instruction and let students know where you are at any point along the way during the day. And I found that to be probably the most important part of what I was doing in a lesson plan. I would write it down in a spiral-bound notebook and have it on the board as well. And that way, in the notebook, it served as a reminder to students who were absent. They could flip back and see what happened so that they could catch up. But I would put it under the document camera, so they would come in, they would see, not only I would put also what materials they needed out for the day, everything else I did not want to see it, phone or whatever, it just was under the desk. And so only the stuff they needed on the desk, and they found that from the agenda. And then they would also see the learning goal, could write it down in their notebook and get ready for the day. So by the time the bell rings, they know what is going to happen that day. They know what materials they need. They know what the learning goal is. And so when the bell rings, it's time to really start teaching. Okay, it also saves you, as we mentioned, last-minute scrambling. It provides everybody, including the student, with an overall flow for the lesson, which is important for them to have context as well as you. And again, I would consider posting it. I love the idea of an announcement on Google Classroom. And as we stated before too, be sure you're referring back to that learning goal and the agenda as you're teaching. Just again, establishing that context for students helps learning to occur much more naturally. Let's move on to an activity that you're going to do to either build background knowledge or activate prior knowledge that they might have. For most lessons, you're likely to have that. A lot of times that's in a warm-up or a bell ringer kind of activity. Sometimes it might be pulled out as a separate activity. Sometimes you might not need it, but in the most part, even if you're just trying to establish continuity from one day to the next, there's some way you're going to need to tap into what they already know or what they've already done in order to continue the learning for the day. Okay, so it can be bell work, as we mentioned, that it's not random. If you're going to have bell work or a warm-up or something like that, please just don't make it a time activity to give you a chance to take attendance. Although it has that value. It's really important, especially here. But you need that attendance in 10 minutes or whatever it is after the start of the period. But make sure that whatever you're doing to activate knowledge, to build knowledge, is whatever bell work is going to be is relevant. So you're going to review the prior learning, or you're going to draw on students' previous life experience, because that's something that might be relevant for what you're going to be working on. And you can also use this as an opportunity for students to build knowledge or practice of a skill that will support the upcoming lesson. Maybe it's a math concept you've been working on and you just want to remind them of it, give them one last chance to practice it before you build on it for the next step. Now, the consideration, though, is if you can structure this as an independent piece, and they come in, they know, they sit down, they see what they do, and they get right to work on it, as Danny does, then that does free you up to do those tasks that are a little menial, like taking attendance, checking in with any students that might have a check-in, check-out, or some other thing that needs to be attended to, checking homework, whatever it might be. Okay, the GRR stuff. We've already talked about this and how to deal with it. So the idea of adding letters or switching or numbers to delineate the order that these are being done in, flipping them, just physically cut and paste so that they're in the right spot. And again, these minutes are just suggestions. And they're suggestions that accommodate either a 50-minute period, which is what most of you have, or the 110-minute Alvarez special period that can be really difficult if you're not a science teacher. So, but either way, it should accommodate that. Or you plan 2 separate lessons, or even more if you've got a block schedule. Okay, so this is your opportunity to provide the direct instruction for a limited time. Okay, you're not going to lecture the whole period. If you do have a long lecture or direct instruction, then break it up into chunks with the other stuff. Don't just go on forever and ever because you'll lose them. And you need to stop and make sure they're getting it before you build on that. Okay, so you're going to need to determine the mix of guided instruction, collaboration, and independent work for the lesson, how much it's going to take, how it's going to occur. And then we talked about that idea of a lot of times during the collaborative process, or sometimes even during the independent work, you can use that as a time to address the needs of people that need further instruction or support. And we talked about what if you feel uncomfortable with a lot of group work. And there's a little icon on that slide, and you have the handout of this article in the purple pages called, mine's too small here, but it's the first 20 days of school. This is an article by Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey about group work strategies. And they suggest that you roll out a new strategy every day during the first 20 days that will support your instruction throughout the rest of the year. I personally never rolled out all 20. I found it a little overwhelming. So I picked out the key strategies that were most important and useful to me and used those in my first couple of days of school. I taught those routines to my students. And Danny's going to be talking a lot tomorrow about teaching routines to your students to help make your classroom run really smoothly and safely and equitably for all of your students. So first 20 days, great resource to refer to. But again, I wouldn't implement all of these the first 20 days. One thing that I found to be helpful is I would pick one strategy, one or two strategies a week, and kind of focus on those over time. And maybe for the first couple weeks. Then we just work with those for a quarter, whatever, and then maybe take another one here and there and keep adding it in.